So this is the last part of the chapter in which we are going to study about separating the components of a mixture. We have understood in this chapter since beginning the meaning of pure substances which exist in the form of elements and compounds, and some other substances which are mixtures, which can also be naturally occurring substances. And we have in detail understood the differences between the properties of mixtures and compounds, or mixtures and pure substances. Then we have understood in detail about solutions, because solutions are kinds of mixtures and their types and their characteristics. So true solutions, colloids, suspensions, these are all types of mixtures which we come across in chemistry and in our day-to-day lives, that we discussed in the last video. In this video, we are going to study or talk about separating the components of mixture, how to separate mixture. And we know that compounds cannot be separated by physical means, but mixtures can be. So what are the methods with which we can separate the components of a mixture? So we have understood that most of the naturally occurring substances are not chemically pure. So we use some of these as such in our daily life. In many materials, we have to separate the useful components from unwanted components before we can use them. And different methods are used to get individual components from the mixture. The separation of components of a mixture is necessary to get pure and useful components. So separation of components is a very useful method. The heterogeneous mixtures can be readily separated into their respective components by simple physical methods. Heterogeneous mixtures can be readily separated into their respective components by simple physical methods such as hand picking, sieving, sedimentation, decantation, filtration, etc., which we use in our day-to-day lives. Sometimes special techniques are to be used for separation of components of mixtures. You've already learned that some simple methods of separation of mixtures in your earlier classes. Okay, let us learn some more methods of separation of components of mixtures by performing some activities. Number one, how to obtain colored component or dye from blue or black ink. The colored component or dye can be obtained from blue or black ink by the process of evaporation, which is the simplest process. Let's do one activity. So in this activity, we have to separate the components of a mixture by evaporation. So you have to take a beaker, a watch glass. Watch glass is this kind of a saucer which can rest on the mouth of the beaker, a burner and some blue ink. Fill the beaker with water, half the beaker. Place the watch glass on the mouth of the beaker. So what will happen is, if you on the burner, the heat of the burner heats the water in the beaker. The water gets heated up, gets converted into steam and gets accumulated over this bottom surface of the watch glass. So it eventually gives its heat, steam gives its heat to the watch glass. The watch glass gets heated and the substances which are placed inside the watch glass also gets heated. Now you have to put a few drops of ink on the watch glass. Now start heating the beaker. It may be noted that we should not heat ink directly. Therefore, this arrangement is needed. we should not heat ink directly. Okay, we should not put the ink directly under flame. That's why we heat it over hot water. Now you will observe that evaporation is taking place from the watch glass. Continue heating till evaporation goes on and stop when you do not see any further change on the watch glass. Observe the changes carefully and make records. Now answer the following questions. What has evaporated from the watch glass? Is there any residue left on the watch glass? What do you conclude? Is the ink single substance or is it a mixture? So understand each and every question. What has evaporated from the watch glass? Now ink drops, which were generally liquid in color, all the liquid from that ink gets evaporated on heating. On heating the watch glass through the hot water beneath it, from the steam from the hot water beneath it, the liquid part of the ink gets evaporated. Is there any residue left on watch glass? What do you mean by residue? Residue is the leftover substances. When you heat something, the leftover particles are known as residue. Okay? Yes, there is a residue left on the watch glass, which is generally a colored residue. And you have to observe this residue and conclude whether ink is a single substance made up of a single color or is it a mixture. Now, we observe that ink is a mixture of dye and water. The dye remains on the watch glass whereas water evaporates. This process of separating any substance from its solution by removing water is called evaporation. This process of separating any substance from its solution by removing water is called evaporation. And the dye remains in the watch glass, water evaporates. Okay, so we have separated first the ink, the dye from ink by evaporating the water. This method can be used to separate non-volatile component or solute from its volatile component, solvent. Now, can you guess which is the volatile component, which is the solvent? Solvent is generally water. In case of ink, solvent is generally water. What is non-volatile component or solute? It is the dye. The colored substance which is put in ink, the colored solid substance, it is non-volatile component. And this process is used on a large scale to obtain common salt from seawater or lake water containing common salt. You know salt pans? Let me show you a picture of salt pans. So this picture shows a salt pan. So a salt pan is a place where the water, saline water, water containing dissolved salt from sea or a lake, mostly sea, generally seawater has dissolved salts in it. So it is spread over a large surface area like this. Okay, and with the heat of sun, the water gets evaporated from this salt pan, and only the salt is left behind. The white color substance which you see is the salt. So this salt is accumulated and then it is further purified, and then some industrial processes happen and you get purified salt. So this is how that salt is obtained. The main process, which is the process of separation, which is used for separating salt from seawater, is evaporation. Since a large surface area helps the evaporation to be quick, the evaporation takes place and the salt gets left behind as residue. Water gets evaporated, the solvent, that is, you can say, volatile component, which is water, gets evaporated, and non-volatile component, that is salt, left behind. Now, again coming back to the word volatile, because that might give you some issues. Volatile is a substance which can evaporate easily. Okay, non-volatile substances do not evaporate easily. Okay, seawater is collected in open shallow beds at high tide, and the shallow beds are also called lagoons. In the hot sun, water evaporates and salt is left behind. The salt is then collected in heaps and packed, as I showed you in the picture. The next process of separation talks about the separation of cream from milk. Cream from milk can be obtained by the process of centrifugation. So the first process of separation was studied by us was which was evaporation. The next process of separation is centrifugation. Nowadays we get different varieties of milk, such as full cream milk, toned milk, double toned milk, etc., packed in polypacks or tetra packs. These varieties of milk contain different amount of milk fat. We generally require cream for different purposes. So this can be obtained from milk. The method can be learned by following the activity. So let's perform this activity to separate cream from milk by centrifugation, and we'll also understand what is centrifugation. Take some full cream milk in a test tube. Centrifuge the cream using a centrifugal machine for 2 to 3 minutes. Now you must be wondering, what is a centrifugal machine? Let me show you a video based on that. Centrifuge machine. There are many videos. Let's see the first one. I think it looks good.
When a liquid containing suspended materials is allowed to stand for some time, the heavier particles will settle down through a process called sedimentation. This can be used to separate the material from the liquid. But what will we do if the suspended material is very light? It will take days to settle. In such cases, we can use the process of centrifugation to quicken the process of sedimentation. Centrifugation is the process of separating substances of different densities from a mixture with the help of a centrifuge. Let us conduct an experiment to see centrifugation. For this we need a handy centrifuge machine, muddy water, mixture of calcium carbonate in water, 4 centrifuge test tubes. Take the sample of muddy water and place the test tubes in the centrifuge machine. Now take the calcium hydroxide mixture in the test tubes and also place them in the centrifuge machine. Rotate the machines fast for few minutes.
So what is happening over here is the machine is being rotated, and if you see the test tubes, they go round and round. Okay, they start rotating at a very high speed. Now due to this very high speed, there is a force which is created in the material which are kept in the test tube, which is known as centrifugal force. Now you will study about centrifugal force in higher classes, but Right now you should know about them as a fact that these forces will push all the heavy particles towards the bottom of the test tube. So all the heavy particles will be pushed towards the bottom of the test tube and they will get settled over there. And all the light materials, light particles will be above the heavy particles. Let's see what happens.
Stop rotating. Remove the test tubes and observe. We see mud particles and white precipitate have settled in each of the test tubes.
Do you see that?
This is the process of centrifugation.
Yeah, so basically that is centrifugation, whose video we saw. So we can use this same method of centrifugation to separate cream from milk. Okay, if centrifugal machine is not available, you can do it with the help of a churner used in the kitchen. For this, you can take the milk in a jug and churn it with a churner for 4 to 5 minutes. So when you churn the milk, the solid fat particles which were uniformly mixed all throughout the liquid will all settle at the bottom. Sorry, the lighter cream has collected at the top and milk without cream has remained below. So generally milk contains lighter dissolved particles which are the cream particles, the lighter fat particles. They will float on the top surface and the milk which is heavier will go down. So cream can be separated from the milk using this centrifugation process. So this method of separating solid particles from dissolved liquid or suspended in liquid is called centrifugation. This is a method for separating the particles suspended in a liquid. Remember that. So if the question comes to you, in which case can we use centrifugation? Can centrifugation be used for solutions? No. Centrifugations can be used for colloids, in which or suspensions in which the particles are suspended. Colloids and suspensions, they both can be separated. The components of colloids and suspension both can be separated by the method of centrifugation. And the solvent in both the cases must be liquid and the solute must be solid. Okay, so sometimes the solid particles in a liquid are too small and readily pass through a filter paper, so filtration cannot be used. These solid particles can be separated with the help of a machine known as centrifugal machine. The machine can be rotated at a very high speed. The principle of this process is that denser particles are forced to the bottom and the lighter particles stay at the top when spun rapidly. So, in the suspension particles suspended in the liquid, the heavier particles settle down at the bottom of the test tubes. This method of separation finds its importance when the test tubes are rotated at a very high speed. One material is heavier than the other. What are the applications of centrifugation? The process of centrifuging finds many applications in our day-to-day life. Some of these are: the process of centrifuging is used in dairies and homes to separate butter from cream. I don't know how many of your in your homes, your mom or your other family members, they make butter from cream. So the process of making butter from cream or ghee, basically, the desi ghee, Shuddha desi ghee, which we consume, is obtained from cream. The cream is obtained from milk. So if you have full fat milk, which gives a huge quantity of cream, This cream is collected over a period of time, let's say maybe 15 days, 20 days, or a month. And this collected cream, which has got high quantity of fat in it, is first, it is stored in refrigerator. Okay. Now this refrigerated cream is collected in a jar and the jar is churned. Okay. When you churn the jar, what happens is all the lighter particles, they float, and the heavier particles, they go down. So in this case, the lighter particle is white butter. Okay, lighter particles, they float, and the heavier particles, that is the liquid, which is basically the buttermilk, it settles down. Okay, buttermilk settles down. Buttermilk is the same thing as you know it, charch. Okay, but that is not obtained from the curd. This buttermilk which we are talking about is obtained by churning cream, which is obtained from milk. Okay, so the butter, white butter, which you obtain, when you heat it over a period of time, it gets converted into ghee, that is solid saturated fat, solid or semi-solid. It's also in the form of liquid. Okay, so the process of obtaining ghee from the cream of milk is basically centrifugation. And for this process, we don't use centrifugation machine. We use your normal mixture grinder, which is available in your kitchen. Right? It's a very useful kitchen appliance. It is also used to chop and cut things, but it is also used for centrifugation process, and for converting cream into butter and ghee eventually. So process of centrifugation is also used in washing machines. It is also used in washing machines to squeeze out water from wet clothes. You might have observed in your, if you have a fully automatic washing machine, the final cycle of that washing machine is known as spin, basically. So in spinning, when the washing machine is spinning at a very high speed after the clothes have been washed thoroughly, it it spins at such a high speed that all the clothes, they stick to the walls of the that tub, which is rotating at a very high speed, and that tub has holes in it, and through these holes, the water, which is flung out of these clothes, it drips out, so the clothes become almost dry. Almost dry, they don't have any, they are not dripping, basically. So if you don't have washing machine and if you wash clothes, you need to rinse the clothes out of water. Okay, once you do the rinsing process, all the water drips out. But in washing machine, it is just spinned. Washing machine is put into the final cycle of spinning, which squeezes out all the water, and this also is based on the principle of centrifugation. Then centrifugation is uh, extremely useful in diagnostic laboratories for different tests of blood and urine. So you might have done a blood test or a urine test in your life. I'm sure about that, or you might have heard about it. So blood test and urine test. First, they collect your blood sample in a test tube, and then that blood sample is put into a centrifuge. This centrifuge rotates at a very high speed. All the red blood cells they settle down after centrifugation at the bottom of the test tube, and all the plasma, that is the white, colorless, not white but colorless component of your blood, it floats above the red blood cells. So the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the colorless plasma all are separated by the method of centrifugation. And the same is done with urine, where centrifugation separates out the heavy and lighter particles, and then it is very easy to test the blood. And what does blood contain? which gives us an idea about what anomaly or you can say diseases a body might have. So it is extremely useful, this process of centrifugation, in diagnostic laboratories for the tests of blood and urine. It is used in chemical laboratories and industries for separating suspended material from liquids. Like we just saw calcium hydroxide or calcium carbonate. If the solution of that said material is taken in test tube and it is put into the process of centrifugation, you can separate the heavy and light particles of these suspensions. Okay, so the first method which we discussed was evaporation. Okay, the second method which we discussed was centrifugation. The third method which we are going to discuss now is the method of separation of immiscible liquids. I already gave you the meaning of the word immiscible. What is immiscible? Immiscible means the substances, generally liquids, generally liquids, which has different densities, and that's why they do not mix with each other. They do not mix with each other. The substances or liquids which have different densities, which do not mix with each other, are known as immiscible liquids. These immiscible liquids can be separated by a separating funnel. Okay, these immiscible liquids are separated by a separating funnel. This is a separating funnel. Let's understand one the function or the working of separating funnel using a activity. So in this activity, we have to take a mixture of mustard oil or kerosene oil in water. Now you will observe if you try to mix mustard oil or kerosene oil with water, you will find that they never mix with each other. The oil floats on water because oil has got less density than water. So it always floats on water. It never mixes with water. You have to take this mixture and allow it to stand undisturbed for some time till the separate layers of oil and water are formed, like one which you see in the diagram. The apparatus which you see over here is known as separating funnel, which has a narrow mouth which is closed with the help of a cork, a broad body or a curved body, and a narrow opening at its bottom, which is stopped with a stopcock. This is known as a stopcock. Stopcock. This stopcock has a spring inside it. Once you pull this lever which is outside, this knob, the stopcock opens. And once you release it, the stopcock closes itself with the spring action. Okay, so it must have the stopcock at the bottom end, narrow end. At the bottom, okay, this whole separating funnel has to be adjusted on a stand as shown in the figure. Now at the bottom of the separating funnel, you should put a beaker or a container, which will be helpful for separating the two substances, which are two immiscible liquids basically, which are filled in the separating funnel. Now you will observe that mustard oil forms the upper layer, water forms the lower layer. What does this show? This show that these two liquids are immiscible. They do not mix with each other. This also shows that mustard oil has a lower density. It is lighter substance. Water is a heavier substance. Now open the stopcock of the separating funnel and pour the lower layer carefully in a beaker drop by drop. close the stopcock as the oil reaches down and is left behind in the separating funnel. So what will happen is slowly all the water will drip down or escape through the stopcock into this beaker, and only oil will be left behind. How? You will see that the oil layer is coming down, and it is reaching the stopcock, and as soon as the oil reaches the lower portion, you should stop the stopcock. You should keep the water separately, and then you can take a, you can say, an empty container and remove some of the last portion of that oil water mixture, just to be careful that you have separated all the water and only oil is left inside the separating funnel. And then you can understand that the oil and water are completely separate. The water is collected in a separate beaker, the oil is left behind in the separating funnel. So this is how you separate two immiscible liquids using a separating funnel. Okay, so what are the applications of this method? This method is used for separating oil and water mixture. It is used to separate some organic compounds present in aqueous solutions. It is used for the extraction of iron during its metallurgy. The lighter slag, see this extraction of iron from using metallurgy is to be studied in detail next year in class 10th in the chapter of chemistry, metals and non-metal, in which the lighter slag is the, you can say, impurity. Okay, it is removed from the top by this method to leave the molten iron, which is pure molten iron, at the bottom of the furnace. Okay, so lighter slag floats on the heavy molten iron, and it is removed by the method of separating funnel, by the process of separating funnel, and that is one application of this process. The fourth process which we are going to talk about is the process of uh, separation of two solids by sublimation. The process of sublimation, which is used for separating two solids. Now, one of the solid is non-sublime or non-sublimable, and another solid is sublimable. We have studied about sublimable and non-sublimable substances in chapter 1. Correct? So ammonium chloride is sublimable. On heating, it directly gets converted into gaseous state. Common salt is non-sublimable. More sublimable substances are ammonium chloride, camphor, naphthalene, anthracene, benzoic acid, etc. These are all sublimable solids. So a mixture which contains sublimable volatile component and a non-sublimable impurity, the process of sublimation is used. So how to use sublimation? In the process of sublimation, for separating two mixture of two solids, we take one china dish in which we put the mixture of common salt, which is non-sublimable, and ammonium chloride. Then we heat this china dish by keeping an inverted funnel over it. This inverted glass funnel is closed, the narrow end of that funnel is closed with a cotton plug so that no ammonium chloride vapors escape out. So when you heat this china dish, all the ammonium chloride which is present gets converted into gaseous form and sticks to the walls of the container. So the walls of the container, as you can see over here, they are made up of, they contain or they the ammonium chloride in the solid form gets deposited on these walls. Okay, that is the right word. The vapors of ammonium chloride get condensed on these cold walls of inverted funnel and they get deposited over there. What about salt? Since salt is non-sublimable, it does not get evaporated. Okay, so salt is left behind. Yeah, salt on strong heating can get molten, can become can get converted into molten state. But on light heating, it stays as it is, and ammonium chloride is deposited on the walls of the funnel, inverted funnel. And that's how the contents of this mixture of sublimable and non-sublimable solids are separated. So sublimable process can be used for separating those substances which sublime on heating. Next is the separation of a mixture containing two miscible liquids. Okay, before that I had skipped one part. Let's read this. A mixture of more than two immiscible liquids. A mixture of more than two immiscible liquids. Uh, we saw one of a mixture which contained two miscible liquids. But what if you have more than two immiscible liquids? We saw a mixture of two immiscible liquids, that is water and oil. But mixture of more than two immiscible liquids can also be separated with the help of a separating funnel. For example, when a mixture of water, benzene and mercury is put in a separating funnel, it separates into three layers. Mercury is the heaviest out of them, so it settles down. The bottom layer is of mercury. Water forms the middle layer, and benzene, being the lightest, least density, forms the top layer. On opening the stop cock, sorry. Some in the previous, I saw that in the previous section they wrote stop cork. It is not stop cork. It is stop cock, as I rightly said. Okay. So on opening the stop cock, the mercury at the bottom will come out first, followed by water and then benzene. So separating funnel is useful that way. But what if we have miscible liquids? Now we cannot use separating funnel. So the fifth process of separation, the advanced process of separation, is distillation. Okay, a mixture of miscible liquids can be separated by the process of distillation. Two miscible liquids can be separated by the process of distillation. See, generally, if you ask me, the uses of distillation, it can be used distillation can be used to separate two miscible liquids having different boiling points, and it can be used to separate and obtain the liquid component from a solution. If you want to obtain the solvent or the liquid component from a solution, you can use distillation. For example, you have salt water mixture. So from the mixture of salt water, if you want just water, so what you can do is you can use the process of distillation. In distillation, what we do is we heat the mixture, the solution. All the liquid component gets evaporated and gets collected in a distillation chamber. In that in a condensation chamber or a condenser chamber. In that condenser chamber, that steam or that liquid component in gaseous form is cooled down, and it is converted into, it is condensed back into liquid form. That liquid is pure water. The salt is left behind in the container in which the mixture was heated, right? So that is one more, you can say, example for the use or application of distillation. It is also used for separating two miscible liquids which has different boiling points. Let's see how it is done. So in the process of distillation, let's first have a read, and you take notes, and then we'll see the diagram and understand. Okay, and if required, we'll see a video also. In this process, the liquid is heated to its boiling point so that it is converted into vapors. First, the liquid is heated and converted into vapors. On cooling the vapors, I told you that there is a condensation chamber in which the vapors are cooled. Pure liquid is obtained and collected separately. The apparatus used for this process is shown in the figure. I'll just show you. It consists of a flask known as distillation flask having a side tube connected to a condenser. Let's see the figure. Okay, so here there is this distillation flask. It has this side tube connected to a condenser, okay, through which the vapors enter the condenser. And in the condenser, if you see, a small thin tube is passing. So vapors actually do not mix with this water. Okay, vapors, they enter this condenser uh, through this thin tube which is kept at the middle of the condenser. So the vapors actually do not come in physical contact with the water. Acha, what is this water used for? The water is put in from this inlet at the bottom, and it goes around this tube, and it comes out through this upper part. Now this water, which is, you can say, a normal tap water, it is it has no use in in mixing with the constituents of this mixture. It is just there for cooling the vapors, for condensing the vapors. As soon as this cool, or you can say room temperature tap water comes in contact externally, comes in contact with this tube, the vapors in the inside the tube, they condense immediately due to the low temperature around it, and they condense, get converted into water droplets, and they collected in this receiver. So this is the whole setup. Water is heated here. See, I'll just walk you through what is happening over here. So water is heated in this round bottom flask, which is known as distillation flask. Now, if you observe, this distillation flask is not directly kept over the flame, but it is kept in a water bath. What is a water bath? Water bath is a, you can say, a open flask kind of a thing in which there is water, and this water is heated directly under the flame. In this heated water, hot water, this round bottom flask is kept. Inside the round bottom flask, there is a mixture of acetone and water. Now, as the mixture starts heating, the vapors of whichever substance has got lesser boiling point comes out, and those vapors enter this tube, goes into this small thin tube which is kept inside a condenser. Due to the water which is running outside the small thin tube in the condenser, these vapors, they condense and they get converted into liquid form, and then they get connected in the receiver. Okay, now this is the whole activity. Let's read the theoretical part and get back to the activity all over again. Now the mixture is separated. To be separated is taken in this flask. The flask is gently heated on a water bath or even directly. That's what they have mentioned. The liquid having lower boiling point will vaporize first, and when it passes through the condenser, the vapors get condensed in the liquid form. Water is passed through the condenser, which cools the vapors. In this way, whole of the component having low boiling point is collected in the receiver, and the other component having high boiling point remains in the flask. This is how two miscible liquids having separate or having different boiling points are collected by the process, separated by the process of distillation. Okay, now there are few questions which they have asked based on this activity. Number one, what do you observe as you start heating the solution? As you start heating the solution, you observe some vapors which arise from the heated liquid. So as we start heating the solution, vapors start coming out of it. At what temperature the thermometer reading became constant for some time? See, there is a thermometer as well, which I did not mention earlier. So this thermometer will show different readings at different instance of time. Initially, when you start heating, the temperature in the thermometer will go on increasing. The reading of the thermometer will go on increasing. But it will stop or it will become constant for some time at a point when one of the component of this mixture, one of the liquid component of this mixture attains its boiling point. Because you know that at boiling point, the temperature does not increase. So at what temperature the thermometer reading becomes constant for some time? When the mixture, when one of the component of the mixture attains its boiling point, at that point of time, the thermometer reading will become constant. Now that boiling liquid will become into vapor quickly and get and pass through the condenser and become liquid again and get collected in the receiver. But what about the other liquid which is not boiling? So the other liquid which is not boiling will stay inside the distillation flask in the mixture and will continue to heat further. Okay, what is the boiling point of acetone? So that will come to know uh, once we do this experiment. I think it is around 70 degrees Celsius. Why are we able to separate the two components? We are able to separate the two components of this miscible mixture. Liquids are miscible and they are kept in a mixture. We are able to separate these two liquids which are miscible because they have different boiling points. So yeah, 56 degrees Celsius is the boiling point of acetone. Okay, so as we observe that when we start heating, the vapors of low boiling liquid, that is acetone, are formed first and start rising. As the vapors pass through the condenser, they get cooled and are collected in the receiver. The reading of thermometer becomes constant at 56 degrees Celsius. This represents the boiling point of acetone. After some time, no more vapors of alcohol are formed. We observe that water is left behind in the distillation flask. This method is called distillation. It is used for separation of the liquids whose boiling points are sufficiently different. What is the boiling point of acetone here? 56 degrees Celsius. What is the boiling point of water? 100 degrees Celsius. There is a sufficient gap between them. So we can use this method of distillation for separating the mixture of acetone and water. At 56 degrees Celsius, when the thermometer shows 56 degrees Celsius, the acetone starts boiling and getting converted into vapors rapidly. But the water will continue to heat. It will not start boiling yet. So the component which comes out through this condenser in the liquid form will be only acetone at 56 degrees Celsius. But at 57 degrees Celsius, 58, 59, 60, 70 degrees Celsius, even though if some vapors come out of here and become liquid, they will be water vapor, because after 56 degrees Celsius there is no question of any acetone being left inside. It will be completely boiled off. So what are the applications of this process, simple distillation. This method of distillation is used for separation of two miscible liquids that boil without decomposition and have sufficient difference, more than 25 Kelvin or 25 degrees Celsius in their boiling points. Separation of volatile liquids from non-volatile impurities is also done using simple distillation. So they have given some examples for the separation of which this method can be used. This method can be used for the separation of ether and toluene. Ether and toluene has boiling point of 308 and 384 Kelvin respectively. So there is a sufficient difference between their boiling points. Benzene and aniline, hexane and toluene. These examples which you see of liquids are mostly uh, organic compounds. They are organic compounds. You will study about organic compounds in class 10th. So the difference should be more than 25 Kelvin in the boiling points of the constituents of a mixture. Then simple distillation method can be used. But the next distillation method which we are going to discuss is little bit more complicated, that is fractional distillation. What if the difference in boiling points of two miscible liquids is less than 25 degrees Celsius? If the difference in boiling point of two miscible liquids of a mixture is less than 25 degrees Celsius, then the process of simple distillation cannot be used. This is because the vapors of both the liquids will be formed simultaneously together because they have close boiling points. And the distillate is this liquid which is separated, will also contain both of the liquids. So then there is no point of separation. To solve this problem, the distillation is carried out by using fractionating columns. Do you see this extra piece of apparatus which is attached or which is fitted above the round bottom flask? This is a glass column which has a narrow, you can say, bottom, and the upper end of this glass column is fitted with a cork which has a hole in it. In that hole, a delivery tube is connected, apparatus which is known as a delivery tube. So the mouth of the delivery tube opens into a condenser, and through this condenser, the vapors condense and they are collected in a receiver. So the only difference between fractional distillation and your normal distillation is the fractionating column which is attached above the round bottom flask. Everything else is same. So what does this fractionating column do? What is the function of this fractionating column? Now you see that inside the fractionating column there are small beads. These small beads are glass beads. Glass beads. These glass beads are just kept inside it. Okay, they do not just fall out of this part because this part is really narrow. These glass beads are kept here because they increase the surface area for some vapors to get condensed at you can say a lower temperature. See, if you start heating water, water will start forming vapors at 30 to 50 degrees Celsius as well. So where do these vapors go? These vapors, they are not very, very hot. They are having a, you can say, normal temperature. These vapors, as soon as they come in contact with these glass beads, they get condensed over the surface of the glass beads, become water drops again, and trickle down and fall back into the round bottom flask where they get heated all over again. And this process of vaporizing one of the component of the mixture at a lower temperature and condensing over the glass beads and trickling and falling back into the you can say round bottom flask repeats again and again and again till the boiling point of one of the component of the mixture is reached. So we have to take one example and understand, and let's see if I can show you the video as well. Okay. The method used is called fractional distillation. In this method, some obstructions are provided to the passage of vapors. The fractionating column is tube packed with glass beads. These beads provide surface for vapors to cool and condense, as I told you. The fractional distillation method can be used to separate acetone, whose boiling point is 56 degrees Celsius, and methyl alcohol, whose boiling point is 65 degrees Celsius. What is the difference? Difference in their boiling points is just 9 degrees Celsius. So it's possible in the mixture of acetone and ethyl alcohol, when you heat it, both the vapors of acetone and methyl alcohol, they start forming simultaneously, and both of the vapors, they pass through this fractionating column. But since the temperature of the vapors is not very large, not very high, they just condense over the glass beads present in fractionating column, get converted into liquid form and trickle down to fall back again into the glass round bottom flask, into the mixture again, and get heated again. Now what happens is, the temperature of the mixture is continuously increasing because we are continuously heating it from beneath, right? So as 56 degree Celsius temperature is reached of this temperature, which can be recorded directly from this thermometer, what happens is, at 56 degrees Celsius, one of the component, that is acetone, will get converted into vapor for good, permanently. Yeah, as long as the temperature remains 56 degrees Celsius, acetone will be in liquid form, and acetone vapors will not now fall down, will not get condensed, no matter what happens, because acetone vapors have now reached their maximum possible temperature in liquid form. So they will be in their vapor form, and the temperature is maintained at 56 degrees Celsius by this continuous heating. So they will go up, they will not get condensed over here, because this area has now also come in contact with the 56 degrees Celsius hot acetone vapors, and the temperature of this area will also become 56. The temperature of thermometer will also show 56 degrees Celsius. So the vapors of acetone will have now no space, no scope of getting condensed over here in fractionating column and trickling down in the form of liquid and falling back again into the water bath. It will not happen. It will now travel into the condenser and become liquid and fall into the receiver. But what about alcohol? Alcohol, methyl alcohol, since it has a boiling point of 65 degrees Celsius, what will happen to it? It will not get vaporized so easily until the mixture reaches a temperature of 65 degrees Celsius. The mixture is at temperature of 56 degrees Celsius. So the alcohol vapors will get condensed over these glass beads, get converted into liquid form, and fall down, trickle back down into the glass round bottom flask. Acetone, on the other hand, will not fall down. Acetone will go and get collected over here. Now you will see that the temperature of the thermometer will rise from 56 degrees Celsius to 57, 58, 59. Understand that when the temperature at on this thermometer crosses 56 degrees Celsius, that means all the acetone present here in the round bottom flask has been evaporated, has been driven out of the mixture of acetone and alcohol. Now it has been converted into vapors, and it has been condensed and collected as acetone, pure acetone liquid component in this receiver. So what is left behind now at 58, 59, 60 degrees Celsius? What is left inside? Only methyl alcohol, which will keep on generating its vapors up to 65 degrees Celsius, and those vapors will keep on condensing on these glass beads and trickling down into the round bottom flask. But at 65 degrees Celsius, as soon as the temperature of the mixture attains the temperature of 65 degrees Celsius, methyl alcohol will start boiling. Its boiling point has been reached now. So methyl alcohol will be in its vapor form for good. It will not trickle down by becoming liquid again, because the temperature on the thermometer will be 65 degrees Celsius constant for some time. And all the methyl alcohol present in the round bottom flask, only methyl alcohol, will also get evaporated and condensed and received in a fresh new container. So in the first container we received the first component acetone. In the second similar container we received pure methyl alcohol, I'm sorry. So that's how you use fractional distillation. Let me check if we can see a video of this.
Fractional distillation. Fractional distillation is used for the separation of a mixture of two or more miscible liquids for which the difference in boiling points is less than 25 Kelvin. The apparatus for fractional distillation is similar to that of simple distillation, except that a fractionating column is fitted in between the distilling head and the RB flasks. Materials required: mixture of ethanol and water.
So they have taken a mixture of ethanol and water. The boiling point of water is 100 degrees Celsius and boiling point of ethanol is around 78 degrees Celsius. So the difference between the boiling points of ethanol and water is around 22 degrees Celsius. So they cannot be separated by simple distillation method. That's why we are using this fractional distillation method.
250 ml and 100 ml RB flasks. Stand with clamp. Fractionating column. Distilling head. Porcelain chips. Thermometer adapter.
So they are taking porcelain chips. I had suggested glass beads as shown in the textbook. Both are filled in the fractionating column for the same purpose, for increasing the surface area for vapors to get condensed on it, you can say efficiently.
Water condenser. Vacuum adapter. And heating mantle. Procedure: take a mixture of ethanol and water and pour it into a 250 ml RB flask. Take some porcelain chips and put it into the mixture. Now, connect the fractionating column to the RB flask and
Okay, they are putting the porcelain chips into the mixture, and I'm not sure what is the reason for that. Let's see.
clamp it. Connect a distilling head to the fractionating column and a thermometer adapter containing thermometer to the distilling head. Connect a water condenser to the outlet of the distilling head and clamp it. Now, connect a vacuum adapter to the water condenser and a 100 ml RB flask to the vacuum adapter. Clamp the RB flask and place it in a
Vacuum adapter is just, you can say, a delivery pipe, delivery tube.
beaker containing water. Now, connect a rubber tube between the inlet of the condenser and the tap to allow the cold water to enter. Connect another rubber tube to the outlet of the condenser to pour the hot water from the condenser to the sink.
Now remember this, cold water coming from the sink, coming from the tap of the sink, and hot water going out to the sink, they have no physical contact with the vapors of the constituent of the mixtures. Okay, they are just there to cool or condense the vapors. They do not come in physical contact with the vapors.
Open the tap so that water flows through the tube and fills the condenser and then comes out through the outlet. Set the temperature of the heating mantle and heat the contents of the RB flask. At 78 degrees Celsius, ethanol vaporizes and the vapors rise through the fractionating column and pass through the condenser, and condensation takes place and ethanol gets collected in the receiver flask in the liquid form and water is left behind in the distillation flask. Therefore, the separation of two or more miscible liquids for which the difference in boiling point is less than 25 Kelvin and can be done only by fractional distillation.
Okay, so yeah, this was the video of fractional distillation, which we understood. So the whole process is clear now. Now, in the same way, like we observed the separation of mixture of two miscible liquids using fractionating or fractional distillation, we can separate the components of air by the same method. But for that, air is gas. We cannot separate the constituents of gas in the gaseous form. So we must convert air from gaseous form to liquid form. And this is done by a method which involves compression by increasing pressure and then cooling by decreasing the temperature. So air will be compressed to form liquid air to form liquid air called liquefied air, and then this liquefied air is subjected to fractional distillation and different gases are collected at different times, like how we did with the mixture of two liquids, miscible liquids. The same thing is to be done with liquefied air. The liquid air is allowed to warm up slowly in fractional distillation column. Now this warming up is not done with the help of heat. It is just naturally allowed to warm up, where the cooling is reduced. So the heat starts increasing and the gases starts separating at different heights depending upon the boiling points. See, the boiling point of liquid nitrogen is the lowest, minus 196 degrees Celsius. So nitrogen gets distilled first of all. Then liquid argon, which has a slightly higher boiling point, minus 186 degrees Celsius. So it is distilled after nitrogen. Then comes oxygen, which has a slight high boiling point, minus 183 degrees Celsius. So it is distilled after argon, and so on. So this is the flow chart of the whole process of separating the constituents of air, that is different gases. First, air is compressed and cooled by increasing the pressure and decreasing temperature. It is converted into liquid air. We allow the liquid air to warm up slowly in fractional distillation column. Now the gases which has different boiling points, they get separated at different heights. Nitrogen followed by argon, followed by oxygen, which all of them has different boiling points, so they are separated at different points of time. Okay, so the boiling points of three common gases formed from air are given over here, and the percentage in which they are obtained are also given over here. 78% will be nitrogen, 0.9% will be argon, and approximately 21% of oxygen. So can you arrange the gases in increasing order of their boiling point? Nitrogen, argon, oxygen. Which gas forms the liquid first and when the air is cooled? Of course, nitrogen. Which gas boils up first when the air boils? Boils up first. Oh, wait. Which gas forms liquid first when the air is cooled? I think it is nitrogen because it has the lowest boiling point. Which gas boils up first when the air boils? Since the boiling point of oxygen is lesser than all of them, and we had to arrange the gases in increasing order of their boiling point. Okay, so the highest boiling point is of oxygen. Yes, so nitrogen, argon, oxygen. And which gas boils up first? It is on heating the air, or when air is cooled. Which gas forms the liquid first when air is cooled? When air is cooled, I think, yeah. So answer of this question, this is little tricky question. I did not think about it much before answering. Which gas forms the liquid first? See, when the air is cooled, that is the first thing which we do. When the air is cooled, the first gas to form liquid is oxygen, and then argon, and then nitrogen. And which gas boils up first when air boils? It is nitrogen, and then argon, and then oxygen. And the gases in the increasing order of their boiling point are also nitrogen, argon, oxygen. Correct? From the table, it is clear that oxygen has higher boiling point than argon, which is less than nitrogen. So these gases can be arranged in increasing order of boiling point as nitrogen, argon, oxygen. Correct. When we cool the air, oxygen will be cooled first. Yes, that's what I told you. On heating liquid air, nitrogen will boil up first. That's what I told you over here. Then argon, then oxygen. So this is the diagram which shows the separation of components of air. You must remember this diagram. This is not a very difficult diagram. This is a filter through which air enters, because all the dust particles should be removed first. That's why filtration. Then air is compressed. This is a compressor. Then the hot air is passed into the mixture of freezing cold water, which cools the air. Then this cold compressed air is passed into a separator where carbon dioxide separates out as a dry air. Then this cold compressed air becomes liquid, and it is passed into a fractionating column where the bottom layer is of oxygen, above that argon, and above that nitrogen escapes out, and liquid oxygen is collected separately. Then there is next method to get pure crystals out of a solution of solid and liquid. Okay, so here we have been given example of obtaining pure copper sulfate from an impure sample. So the method is known as crystallization. The method of crystallization is useful for separating a solid component from a mixture of solid and liquid. And if there is an impurity, that will also be taken care of. The solids can be purified by crystallization method. Crystallization is a process which separates a pure solid in the form of its crystals from a solution. To understand this method, let us perform this activity. We have to take 5 gram of impure sample of copper sulfate in a beaker. You have to dissolve this sample in minimum quantity of water. You have to filter the impurities and collect the solution in china dish. You have to evaporate the water from copper sulfate solution to saturate it. You have to cover the solution with filter paper and leave it undisturbed to cool slowly. You will obtain the crystals of sugar in the dish. Okay, so basically crystals of sugar, yeah, if you have a mixture of copper sulfate and sugar, then this will happen. But you generally, what you do is you evaporate the water from the dish and copper sulfate solution will be there, uh, which will be in saturated form. When you cover the solution with filter paper and leave it undisturbed, you will obtain the crystals of sugar. No, this is wrong. You will obtain the crystals of copper sulfate, CuSO4, not sugar. Okay, this is some mistake here. So what do you observe in china dish? You observe crystals of copper sulfate. How will you separate the crystals from liquid in the china dish? By evaporation. Why is heating of solution is required? For evaporating the liquid part. So we observe that crystals of pure copper sulfate are formed in china dish. The crystals can be separated from the liquid by filtration. You must have noticed that the solution is heated to saturate the solution. This process is called crystallization. So basically you have a solution of copper sulfate in a dish, and when this solution is heated from beneath, what happens is the amount of liquid present lowers gradually. That means the solution becomes more and more saturated, and slowly when you cool the solution you start seeing the crystals of the dissolved solid. So this happens only with some of the solids, not all the solids. Mostly the salts, they crystallize out in this form. Okay, the crystallization technique is better than simple evaporation technique because of the following reasons. During evaporation, the solution is heated to dryness. During heating, some solids may decompose, or some solids like sugar maybe get charred. Charred means they get burned. There is no such problem in crystallization. In both evaporation and crystallization, the solution of impure solid is prepared in water or any other solvent. This solution is filtered to remove insoluble or suspended impurities. However, some soluble impurities may remain in the solution even after filtration, no problem. When such a solution is evaporated, the impurities may remain along with the solid, therefore the solid left may not be pure. However, when the solution is allowed to crystallize, only crystals of pure solid will separate out, leaving the impurities in the solution. Therefore, after filtration and drying, we get pure sample of the substance. So this technique has been used for getting pure sugar from impure sample, the purification of salt which we get from seawater, and separation of crystals of alum from impure samples. Okay, so let's see a video of crystallization which will make our concept more clear. Crystallization of copper sulfate.
Purification of copper sulfate by crystallization. The chemicals used for various purposes should be completely free from any type of impurities. Crystallization is an important purification process in which solid crystals are formed from a uniform solution. The different steps involved in the crystallization process are preparation of solution of the impure sample, filtration of the solution, concentration of the filtrate, cooling of the concentrated solution, separation and drying of crystals. Our aim is to prepare crystals of pure copper sulfate from an impure sample. Materials required: crude sample of copper sulfate, dilute sulfuric acid, distilled water, ethyl alcohol, cold water mixture, 250 ml beakers, china dish, glass rod, spatula, funnel, filter paper, measuring jar, test tube, watch glass, evaporating dish, trough, stand with lamp, and sand bath. Procedure: preparation of solution of the impure sample. Take about 30 ml of distilled water in a beaker. To this, add powdered crude sample of copper sulfate using a spatula. Stir the solution gently with the glass rod so that the powder dissolves. Add the powdered sample several times till a little of it remains undissolved in the beaker even if it is stirred for some time.
So they are making a saturated solution of copper sulfate.
Now add about 3 ml of dilute sulfuric acid to the solution using the measuring jar and gently stir the solution to make it clear. This prevents the hydrolysis of copper sulfate.
Okay, what is hydrolysis? You don't have to worry about it now. You will study it in class 10.
Filtration of the solution. Place a filter paper in the funnel and clamp the funnel to the stand. Place the china dish under the funnel. The stem of the funnel should touch the wall of the china dish to avoid the solution splashing out. Pour the solution into the funnel over the glass rod and collect the filtrate in the china dish. The insoluble impurities are left on the filter paper. Concentration of the filtrate. Heat the china dish in a sand bath till the solution is
So this is a sand bath. We just saw in few of the diagrams water bath. That was heated water, and inside that any substance to be heated was placed. This is sand bath. In the sand we place the substance to be heated.
reduced to about 1/3 of its original volume. To avoid crust
So
formation,
now what we are doing is we are heating this saturated copper solution so that the amount of liquid present, amount of water, that is solvent present in the saturated solution decreases, and this solution becomes thicker.
on the side of the dish, stir the solution continuously with a glass rod. To know if the solution has reached its crystallization point, remove a drop of the solution at the end of the glass rod and cool it by blowing. The appearance of a crust or tiny crystals on the glass rod shows that the crystallization point has been reached. Now
You see the solution has become so thick that if you cool it, the crystals start forming on the edge of the glass rod readily. That means now if you stop it heating and if you start cooling it, crystals will be formed readily.
transfer the hot saturated solution into the evaporating dish.
This is an evaporating dish which is used for just leaving the solution as it is.
Cooling of the concentrated solution. Place the evaporating dish containing the hot saturated solution in a trough containing water. Cover the dish with the watch glass and allow it to cool slowly for some time. As the solution cools, deep blue crystals of copper sulfate separate and the crystallization will complete after half an hour.
Do you see that? How the crystals have been separated out?
Separation and drying of crystals. Decant the mother liquor carefully into a beaker. Wash the crystals 3 or 4 times with a little ethyl alcohol containing a small amount of cold water. Using the spatula, place the crystals on a filter paper which soaks up the solution. Transfer the crystals on another filter paper and dry them by pressing gently between the folds of the filter paper. Now, transfer the crystals into a dry test tube. The crystals of pure copper sulfate are transparent and blue. Precautions. The filtrate should be evaporated slowly by gently heating during concentration. The filtrate should never be heated to dryness. The solution should be cooled slowly without disturbing it. overheating results in the formation of tiny crystals.
So yeah, that was the process of crystallization. I think it was very clear with the help of this video. Otherwise, we would never be able to understand how this process takes place. Okay, so that is the process of crystallization which you just saw. You read it with me, and then you also saw the video. Okay, the next process is chromatography. Let's do this. Is the dye in the blue-black ink a single color? So in the first method of separation by evaporation, we examined ink. We took sample of ink in a watch glass and heated it with a water bath, and all the liquid component was evaporated, and the solid residue which was left, we got it separated. But that solid residue is made up of which color? Is it made up of only blue color, only black color, or which color? Mixture of which color? We don't know that. So to understand what are the components in the dye, in the ink, we use the process of chromatography. This is a special method to separate small amounts of dissolved solids. Chromatography is a special method to separate small amount of dissolved solids. So there is this activity. Take a strip of filter paper, a gas jar, or tall glass or beaker, and water soluble ink. For this, check the solubility of ink in water by taking small amount of ink and adding water to it. Now, you need to draw a line with a pencil approximately 3 centimeter above the lower edge of the filter paper. So if let's say if this is your filter paper, you will draw a line with a pencil approximately 3 centimeter above its lower edge. This is 3 centimeter. Okay, you will draw a line here. Put a small drop of ink in the center of the line with the help of thin capillary tube or an ink pen. So here you need to put a small drop of ink with the help of an ink pen or a capillary tube or a dropper maybe. You need to let that dry. Lower that filter paper till the line into the jar or tall glass containing water. So basically, if you have a water container filled with some part of it in water, so we need to lower this filter paper into water, but make sure that the line on which you have put the ink drop stays above the surface of water. Leave it undisturbed for some time. What do you observe on the filter paper as time passes? Do you obtain different colors? Can you think why this happens? We observe that as time passes, water seeps up the paper carrying the dye with it. Now, what do you understand by this seeps up? See, water has this special, you can say, characteristic by which it absorbs, by which it gets absorbed into paper or any dry substance. Okay, and these dry substances, like let's say, you can take an example of a sponge or a paper. These substances, they have small thin tubes inside them. Okay, when you think of tubes, they are not very, like a proper tube, but these are naturally occurring capillaries inside these substances like paper or sponge, due to which if you keep these substances in water, water gets automatically drawn into it, seeped into it. So water gets drawn into this paper. In which direction? Let me show you. Water gets drawn up in upward direction, starting from here, and water gets drawn up. So after a few, let's say a few days, you might find the paper to become wet. Not a few days, the whole paper will become dry by then. Maybe in half a day or something, the paper will become wet because it will absorb all the water. Correct? Now, as the water rises into the filter paper, it takes along with it the dye particles. After some time, we get different spots on the filter paper. This shows that dye is not a single color. The ink that we use has water as the solvent, and dye is soluble in it. The dye is usually a mixture of two or more colors. The colored component, which is more soluble in water, rises faster, and in this way different colors get separated. The different components from their spots at different places. This process of separation of components is known as chromatography. Okay, so what you see is different components. If you see its actual picture, which I'm going to show you now, you don't obtain, you know, three or more, three or less, or three or more different spots. But what you obtain is a line, a streak, chromatography of ink. Do you see this different samples of paper? Now, in any of the paper, do you see dots? No. But there are, you can say, different shades of color which get spread throughout the paper as water gets seeped into it, as water rises into the paper. You don't get exactly a single color. So you can say all different pens, the ink which they contain, they are made up of different colors, and these colors are obtained as different components on this chromatography paper. See this, yeah, this one. This is a very nice, you can say, sample of chromatography. So as you can see, different ink colors, different sketch pen colors on doing chromatography on them, they get separated into different dye, different colors of dyes as water rises up in this chromatography paper. Okay, not like a spot exactly. So this process of separation of components is known as chromatography. The name comes from Greek word chroma, means color, because this technique was first of all used for the separation of colors. Chromatography has been used for separation of those solutes which dissolve in the same solvent. This has also been used to identify unknown substances. With the advancement of technology, newer techniques of chromatography have been developed. Applications of chromatography. The main applications of chromatography is to separate, number one, colors in the dye, pigment from natural colors, amino acids, sugar from urine sample, drugs from blood. So this technique is finding use in science laboratories and hospitals. So according to the nature of the mixture, different techniques can be selected to get a pure substance. It may be noted that with the advancement of technology, many more methods of separation techniques have been developed. The discussion of more methods is beyond the scope of present book. In cities, we get drinking water supplied from waterworks. A simple flow diagram of typical waterworks is shown in the figure. Carefully observe the diagram and learn the processes involved to get supply of drinking water to your home from the waterworks and discuss in your class. Okay, so we have reservoir of water. We have many dams, water storage sites where the rainwater gets collected in around our area, actually around Navi Mumbai. So basically, even around Mumbai. So the water from this reservoir is brought to a water purification plant where there is a sedimentation tank. Sedimentation is the word which means that water is allowed to settle. Water is allowed to stand for a long time. In this standing water, all the heavy impurities, heavy insoluble impurities, they get settled down. And this heavy impurity, which is insoluble in water, is known as sediment. So sediments get settled down and the water from the top is removed and it is put into loading tank. Now there are some suspended impurities which are lighter, which do not settle down, which always remain suspended. So in loading tank, these impurities are loaded or made heavy with the addition of alum. So alum is one, you can say, substance, chemical which is used for purifying water by acting as a loading agent. It makes the lighter insoluble impurities heavier and makes it settle down. So from this loading tank, water is uh, again put into a new filtration tank where there are different layers of substances. There is fine sand, below that there is gravel, below that coarse gravel. So there are different layers, and in which the water is filtered, and this filtered water is then brought to a new tank, which is chlorination tank, where chlorine and disinfectants are added to the water in very small quantities so that it remains potable, consumable by for human use, for drinking purpose. And the chlorine, being a disinfectant, kills the bacteria or germs, and from chlorination tank the water is supplied to your home. So this is done by our local municipal corporation. Okay, this is their job. They do this and water is supplied to us, and we have this pure, not very pure, but yeah, you can say very much clean drinking water. It has to be purified in our house as well, since when water is supplied to your building, it is stored in underground tanks which might contain more impurities, and then to overhead tanks, and then to your home. So in the whole process some more impurities get added to it. So tap water is not completely free of impurity. It has got some impurities and it has to be purified further for drinking purposes. Okay. So the main separation techniques which are commonly used, apart from the 8 techniques which we have discussed, do you remember which techniques are discussed by us in today's lecture? Number 1, evaporation. Number 2, do you remember which is number 2? After evaporation? After evaporation, I think it was centrifugation. After centrifugation, I think it was after centrifugation, it was after evaporation was centrifugation. After centrifugation, it was crystallization, or it was something else. Let's see. Let's see. Let's not get confused. We have all the techniques here. Yes. Okay, so the first technique was evaporation, that is to obtain colored component from ink and salt pens, then cream from milk, centrifugation, then immiscible liquid separation by separating funnel, then sublimation for separating two solids out of which one is sublimable. Then distillation for separating two miscible liquids, mixture containing two miscible liquids having significant difference in boiling point. Then fractional distillation. Then the same process is used for obtaining different components of air. Crystallization, and then chromatography, and finally, yeah, that's it. So these are all the techniques are studied by us today. Okay, so separation of two solids can also be done by these methods. Let's take a summary of all the methods which can be used. By using suitable solvent. So suppose you have a mixture of sugar and sand, you want to separate it. Add water to it. Sugar will dissolve, sand will not dissolve. Then you filter the mixture and you get sugar, water, evaporate it, you get sugar separately. Then mixture of sulfur and carbon can be separated by dissolving the whole mixture in carbon disulfide solution, which dissolves sulfur, not carbon. And this undissolved carbon can be taken out or separated by filtration. And then you can separate sulfur from dissolved carbon disulfide by evaporation. Then by sublimation, you can separate two solids out of which one is sublimable. We saw the example also. By magnetic separation can be used for separating two solids out of which one is magnetic material, sulfur and iron. Separation of a solid and liquid, the most common method of separation of solid and liquid is filtration. Use a filter paper, insoluble component will be separated out easily. Centrifugation, we saw how to separate lighter and heavier components of a solid liquid mixture. Evaporation, soluble substances can be separated from a liquid by evaporation. Crystallization, pure crystals of a substance of a salt is obtained by using this method, crystallization. Dissolved solids can be obtained separately by chromatography. Distillation can be used to separate the solid and liquid components separately. For two liquids, you can use distillation, fractional distillation, or you can use the method of gravity separation. That is your the separating funnel. Okay, in the end, we are just left with the last topic, physical and chemical changes. The changes in which the physical properties of the substance change, but no new substances are formed, are called physical changes. Remember, physical changes can be reversible, can be irreversible as well, like cutting of hair, breaking of glass, tearing of paper. In these, all the changes are irreversible, but they are physical changes. Why? Because the only point of criteria to differentiate between a physical and a chemical change is whether new substances are formed or not. If new substances are not formed, then it is a physical change. So in tearing a paper, cutting hair, breaking of glass, no new substances formed. That's why it's a physical change. Generally, physical changes are reversible, but some of them can be irreversible. But never it's possible that in physical changes, new substances will be formed. If you heat water, it will get converted into vapor, but it's a physical change because it's a temporary change. Generally, physical changes are temporary. Yeah, but breaking of glass, cutting of hair, tearing of paper is not even temporary. It's permanent. So the only difference, the huge difference, only criteria for differentiating between physical and chemical change is whether new substances are formed or not. Okay, so there are some examples. You can pause your video here and take a note of these examples. Very simple examples which we have studied in previous classes. That's why I'm not reading it out for you. Okay, after you've noted it, let's go to the chemical changes. The changes in which new substances are formed are called chemical changes. That's the main, biggest criteria with which you can differentiate between a change, physical and a chemical. New substances formed means chemical change. Generally, chemical changes are permanent changes, but there are some chemical reactions which are reversible. Okay, when iron is exposed to oxygen, it rusts. So rusting is due to the formation of new substances called iron oxide. That's why rusting is a physical change and it's not reversible. Once iron is rusted, it remains rusted. It is permanent. When magnesium ribbon is burned in oxygen, it forms magnesium oxide, which is a new substance. So it's a chemical change. Burning of candle to give carbon dioxide and water is also a chemical change. Now there is a debate. Burning of candle is physical change or a chemical, but let's talk about this change. Burning of candle. So two things seem to happen in burning of candle. One is melting of wax, because candle is made from wax, and because of increase of temperature the wax starts melting. The melting of wax is a physical change. But that's not the only thing which is happening when a candle is burnt. Burning of wax also takes place near the tip of the candle, near the wick. Burning of wax. And burning of wax results in formation of new substances. See how. So candle is an organic compound. It's a carbon compound. CXHY. So its chemical formula is written as CXHY because it's a hydrocarbon. Candle is a hydrocarbon. Candle is a hydrocarbon. So this wax from the candle, it burns. This wax from the candle, it burns to produce carbon dioxide, water vapor, and lot of energy in the form of heat and light is evolved. Not a lot of energy, but yeah, substantial amount of energy. So new substances are formed. That's visible over here, right? And that's why burning of wax, it's a chemical change. It is a chemical change. So if you ask what is burning of candle, I would say it is both a physical change and a chemical change, since melting of wax is physical but burning of wax is a chemical change. That's why burning of candle is both physical as well as chemical change. Reaction of zinc with hydrochloric acid sounds like a chemical change. Of course it is, you will study it in class 10th. Formation of iron sulfide from iron and sulfur, chemical change. Electrolysis of water, breaking up of water into hydrogen and oxygen. This happens when you pass electricity through water, not on heating water. That's why electrolysis of water is a chemical change, but heating of water is a physical change. Okay, these are the differences between physical and chemical changes. You might have studied them in the previous class, but I recommend that you pause this video right now and note down all the differences so that you have a reference with you, and if this question is asked, you can easily answer the question. All right. So yeah, the chapter is over finally. This video has become a little longer and might be a little boring for you because yeah, theory subjects not much to understand, more to remember, like chemistry, a classic example of a theory subject. So it might have been a little bit boring, but I cannot help it. That's the content of your chapter, so we have to go in detail and finish everything. Okay, so the chapter is over. I'm going to give you the exercise very soon, and I will see you in the next video.